Jayson Richardson. What's up, man?
Man, just another day, I guess.
Yeah. So, well, for those people who are listening or watching who don't know, you are the sheriff of DeSoto Parish here in North Louisiana. And that comes with a lot, man. So how long have you been active in that position now?
So I've been the sheriff since March of 2018.
Okay. Damn, I can't believe it's been that long already.
It's flown by. My previous sheriff that I served as the chief deputy under retired in March of 18, and I had the privilege of taking over as the interim sheriff, and then of course ended up obviously running for the position and was elected that same year. And then the next year was the actual normal election, and I went unopposed that term. So
Gotcha.
It has definitely been a fast 5 years.
Yeah, I didn't realize it'd been that long. I just like yesterday, I feel like I remember you were running.
Right.
But yeah, man. So y'all have done a lot. That's what I want to talk about. And you and I have talked a couple times since then, but not doing this. You've done a lot in this short amount of time, and what I like about your guys' department is it's like you have, first off, you have a huge presence online.
Sure.
Your marketing's done well, and you are basically almost a utility for everyone in that area.
Right.
Aside from you doing your normal daily duties, which you're supposed to do, but you're also providing these other services. Let's just dive into that.
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of recognized. Well, I guess first to kind of establish why that was of importance and why you recognize that as I'm 40 currently. When I became the sheriff in 18, I was 35, youngest sheriff in the history of the parish, and still currently the youngest sheriff in the state. Not ever, but the youngest currently serving, and have been for the last 5 years. So, not saying that as some accolade of mine, but to make the point of, I come up from the age of, as a kid, I had an Atari. Ataris had come out, and then of course the progression from there, just in the computer age, that was, I got my first computer at 12 years old, and have had just been in technology ever since, and then. In one part of my career, from about 2009, 2013, 14, I was in technology. I actually worked, was credentialed by the FBI, worked crimes against children, which basically were technology-related crimes. And so, that just to build that as my background of technology is something that I recognize the importance of, and I'm not afraid of it,
right?
Because I understand it. And so, again, I personally started our social media page at DeSoto Parish Sheriff's Office in 2008, I believe. And
what you started it with nothing?
Yeah,
and
just a page.
How many people are utilizing that now?
Probably 27,000.
Yeah,
and that's what's good, or I guess what's notable about that is that we have roughly 27,000 people on our census in the parish. So, which obviously everybody doesn't have Facebook. So that means we have a reach beyond our parish with our followers. But also, I would say that, we're by far of any entity within our parish, we have the biggest reach to touch the public with whatever message that may be. So I started our page in 2008, 2009. And I mean, you got to think back that far, that like you're just coming off of the MySpace times and into Facebook. That was kind of a new thing. And we started back then, we were actually doing, it wasn't as much informational, but a lot of our wanted individuals we were posting online. And we literally made several hundred arrests via Facebook, which back then that was like some big, today that's just how things are done. But back then, that was a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And even to the point we had an Asian news group come interview our agency about like how that was working, the success of that, and and that was back then. So we progressed that, managed that, and I wasn't quite the sheriff then. I was probably the chief deputy at that point. But I'd spoken to the previous sheriff about. Basically, we need to brand ourselves. That's it's as important for any agency as it is any business in success and consistent messaging and all of those things that, I'd approached him and said, hey, here's kind of what I think and, what I see. And I kind of know I know a few people that I think could help us get that done. And to his credit, and he was kind of like that most of my career. If you bring him a problem and a solution, I mean, he would kind of, make it work, And so I went out and recruited our current guy, which is Mark Pierce. He's our PIO guy, but he manages our Facebook and all of our presence that you see digitally. He manages all of that. And certainly you could see how that has graduated just so far, just with his ability to create the visuals and things like that and all that consistent. You can certainly see the change in that. But I actually recruited him on the Buffalo River. He was a youth pastor at the time and literally floated up beside him and made a proposition. And so a while later he called me and wanted to talk about it more seriously. And so he's that's been 5 years ago, actually. The day he started was the day that was Sheriff Arbuckle's last day.
Okay.
That was a huge piece of that, branding ourselves and being consistent and understanding the metrics so that your reach is wide and useful and but not overusing it so that you become something that people aren't paying attention to, using it in a way that's positive, a way that actually gets you feedback and interaction with the public. And then, for us, it seems as if we have created that, like we are in our area, we're the source of information that people look to find out details, which comes with a pretty big burden, because that's, if you're the source, then you're expected to be providing the information. And so it does come with a burden because you have to be, it doesn't matter what time of the day or night, they're coming to you and they want it, they're looking for that answer. And so,
you take on a lot of responsibility. You kind of, but you ask for it. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
Whereas most other people in your position don't do that. They just don't. It hasn't taken off. I know that like people post wanted stuff, but that even still, you guys have been doing it so long. That only recently started happening around here in other departments that I've seen. But what you guys have done, it's just something that I think stands out, and not only on the marketing side of it, but I guess this is another piece of the marketing, but more like the hands-on stuff. So like everyone talks about your vehicles, everyone talks about your officers. How many deputies work for you now?
162
deputies, and every single one of those people that you see are presentable, and they all seem to be and somewhat physically fit, and able to do their job, and the equipment's there. I feel like everything's there, and like that's another thing I want to talk about because there's so many departments that's not the case. Whether it be a lot of people always use the excuse not funded, right? But I'm sure you have some kind of rebuttal to that.
Well, so I guess one, to be fair, is our agency is there are very few agencies in the country, I would say, that are as blessed as our agency is because of the economics of our parish and particularly natural gas and just things that have taken place that have put our agency in a place that very few people, find themselves in, which is with surplus funding. And there's things, it's hard to compare Louisiana sheriffs particularly to any other sheriff just because of we are different in the way we're funded, different than any other sheriff in the country.
Okay. Well, yeah, let's lay that out because I had no idea.
And so most other sheriffs they have a county commission, or in Arkansas, it's a quorum court that determines what their budget is every year. Mm-hmm. So basically the sheriff presents a budget and people who are not necessarily in public safety determine what they're going to fund that year. And they're also determining between how many roads are going to be fixed and, all of those different types of things. And so, that is how they're funded. In Louisiana, we are not funded that way. We do a lot of stuff wrong in Louisiana, but one of the things that, in my opinion, we do right is sheriffs are statutorily and constitutionally funded, that we get a certain percentage of the collected property tax
Gotcha.
in the parish for public safety, just as the school does and the police juries.
Right.
We get our piece. Now, if the tax base shrinks, they can't put that all on public safety. They can't shrink just public safety. Everybody has to shrink accordingly. And so because of that, we have, just for example, had the Haynesville shale and our natural gas find happened in Texas or Arkansas or any of those other states, well, that surplus of money that we have would not be in the pockets of law enforcement. It would have been in the pocket of the county government and may have never found its way to
And they would have to propose, hey, we need additional funds. Okay, yeah.
And so that's where we're different, is we're giving just like you are at home, when you get your paycheck, we have to figure out how we live within those means. And, if we do better, then, we can expand our abilities and or at home, you're obviously expanding, you could have a nicer car to drive, or you could, you get to decide those things. Well, a lot of those sheriffs don't have that opportunity. And so that's to preface all that and say that we were very fortunate, which is one of the reasons that we've been able to do a lot of the things that we do, because without funding, it is hard to recruit. Without paying a decent wage, but that's not all. That is not the only key. You can pay whatever you want, and if you can't retain people, if you can't,
that's what I wanted to talk about, because there's so many things. Not to even get hung up on the money thing, and I knew that was the case, but I feel like that you've been in this because you were in this position before that, probably before that came around, as far as all those influx in dollars available and funding. Like we went through this entire thing in society and culture to where in our country, where we're past that now, I feel like, but like the whole defund the police thing and defund the people who are working on the front lines, trying to be the ones who are trying to help you, because at the end of the day, that's what your job is, right? It's not to just go out and you be scared of you guys. It's we're here to help you. We're here to protect and serve. Sure. But there's so many other areas that I just don't think are looking at the most important things, and maybe that's a lot of people will say that's due to like lack of availability of employees. Like we're not able to recruit the right individuals. But are you going through the motions to do that? Are you spending some of your money and time on actually upping your recruitment game? Do you have someone in place that's training these individuals? Like just having to qualify when you get the position and then never do it again. As far as like the physical tests and stuff, you have to do that one time, but from what I understand, it's just an incentive to do it every year after that, right? It's not required. Like these, you have officers that are 100 pounds overweight that can't do their job, and that I see that as an issue. But I'm also not in the position. But I do. My wife's a police officer. We talk about these things, and before I talked to you, I was like, I want to talk to him about these these few issues, because I do think that there's something that needs to be talked about. And I was like, do you think that's okay? And she's like, yeah, I think it is, because it's something that needs to be talked about.
No, I agree. Yeah, so, generally, I will tell you that I think a lot of the result that you have, and whether it be physical fitness, mental fitness, any of those things, starts from the day you start interviewing an employee, which we require starting out. We have a certain physical fitness test that and that's most probably wouldn't realize this, but 64 sheriffs in the state, so 64 sheriff's offices, probably 5 of those, and maybe 4 now with population loss in one of those towns, but 5 of those are over 250,000 people, I think, in those parishes. And so those are large agencies that are going to have, they will have recruiting departments and things like that. But generally, at least 40, 45 of those are going to be, offices that are doing all they can within their means. Yeah. And so when I'll tell you that probably, and this is something else that, I'd approached Sheriff Arbuckle about back when he was the sheriff, and it was, we had a lot of applicants because we do pay a high wage. We pay, even currently, we pay the highest starting salary for a certified police officer in the state of Louisiana. And that's, again, because of those blessings, but we still had plenty of applicants prior to being able to do that. And a lot of it was the atmosphere, the feeling of, being at the forefront of things instead of just kind of, old school, staying the way things are forever, that type of mentality. And so a lot of that had to do with that. But we had so many applicants at once that there was no way you would completely vet those applicants. You may have 3 positions you were hiring for, and of those 3, you would have 30 applicants. Well, you can't legitimately background 30 people, go through the whole motions of that and end up with quality employees without some sort of requirement in between that of the person to get to the point of the interview.
Yeah.
So, we traveled around, looked at what some others were doing that was working, that wasn't working, things like that, and established our current hiring process. Well, now, of those 30 people, before we ever get to the interview process, we're probably only 7 or 8 of 30 make it that far because of the physical fitness requirement, because of the other requirements in the background checks and all those things. We're very thorough with that. That way, when we interview those 8 people, every one of those people should have the potential of being hired.
Right.
And then there's things, obviously, you may see in the interview that could be key. Obviously, like you said, law enforcement's under a lot of scrutiny.
Yeah.
So you have to be looking for those things in a personality that could be problems.
Well, yeah, because there's not – I don't want to say that just because you're trying to do this position, you need to be in top-tier physical fitness and look like an athlete. I'm just saying, that's something to be considered that people don't think about or talk about, and it's an issue, but also the mental fortitude. That's a huge issue, right?
Sure.
That's a huge thing we face with, things going wrong, making bad decisions. Those people who want to be Rambo, and join up on the force just because they want to catch the bad guys,
right.
And
those are the things we have the responsibility of trying to catch before it ever happens, and it doesn't work all the time. And so, you have to constantly recognize those things. But, you were talking about the physical fitness piece. What we tend to see now, and you've made the comment based upon an observation of what you've seen, not something that I've said.
Exactly.
So, what I think you see is that if you start that process and you bring the people that you actually end up hiring are people who have all of those qualities of what we are looking for, then those things that you see are the culmination of actually going through the process.
Okay. Yeah.
And you hire, the best. And what we find right now, and you see in locally, but even across the country, but locally too, is because of lack of employees, you see those standards being dropped to, really a substandard or even a minimal standard. And, I've just not, I'm not telling you there couldn't come a point to where, it could happen, but it's really something that I would struggle with doing once you've set that standard, is to coming back off of that standard, because I think you may not see the results of that today or tomorrow, but 10 years from now, when those individuals that you change that standard for are in leadership positions and things like that, I think we come full circle back around to where we have put ourselves at some point with all the scrutiny.
Yeah.
So that's just not something that we're in a place that we're going to consider doing. And, again, that whole recruitment thing is something that it's a long process, for us.
What's that process look? Let's walk through that, because
Sure.
anybody listening and watching, especially if they're existing officers and they're not happy where they're at,
Right.
How does that process work?
So they can go online or they can call our office website, and they submit basically a packet of their intention to test.
Right.
We offer testing generally once a month. So they come to our training center, they do their written testing.
Okay.
If they pass the written test, then they immediately go into the physical fitness test.
What's the physical fitness test look like?
It's a run, sit-ups, push-ups, Cooper standards, based upon Cooper standards. And it is obviously age dependent.
Right.
But it's, we're kind of on the higher end of that scale of, one of the reasons is when we hire somebody, if they're not a post-certified or a state-certified officer or deputy, then when they start with us, they start in the academy. Years ago, you would start because legally you have a year. You can work 1 year without being certified.
Right, and then you have to, within that year, you have to get post-certified. You have to go to the academy and all that.
And so
they just changed that recently, though, right?
No.
Oh, it's still active. Okay.
Yeah, and it is. And so I've lived that experience as a young police officer. I worked an entire year as a city police officer, not certified, and I had some guidance from people, but I mean, I was pretty much learning it, and looking back, which is one of the reasons that we don't do that now. But looking back, you can make a let's just say you were a 3-month in police officer who's never had any standardized training, who's never had a legitimate FTO program, never been through any of that, and it was basically go forth and be the cops.
Yeah.
And then you go do something and make a decision based upon ignorance of something that you never were trained to do or not to do. Your entire career, regardless of whether you can argue the fact that you weren't trained, your career is probably shot.
Yeah.
And then all of the things that we know go along with that, which is lawsuits, potential criminal issues, all of those things that take place. So again, I lived that, and looking back at it, was like, that's not the way.
That's a gamble, yeah.
So, and you're talking about, and I look at things in that perspective of people's lives. Of, that may be simple for us to do as an agency, but when it goes wrong, what's that guy that has a family, and obviously, I mean, they're cops, so he gets in a potential legal battle. I mean, he can't go afford to hire a $30,000 attorney.
Yeah.
So, I look at things like that, and that helps me make my decisions. But, as they go through that process of the physical fitness test, then the background takes us quite a while, because we do physically background, go to their agencies, request all of their information.
These are if they're existing officers,
right?
So
even if they're not.
What's a flag for you? Like, what would you say if I see something on your background check? What would it be, like immediate flag where you're like, okay, I just don't want that type of applicant?
Well, if you've had one that's had multiple cases of use of force complaints that were substantiated, that's problematic. And what you will find is those people who have those kind of problems that are, I would say, instigators sometimes. If you find those, a lot of times you'll find those same type of complaints of from other, not necessarily use of force, but at least where they're having negative interactions with coworkers, things like that.
Gotcha.
I mean, those things are kind of a recipe for, I mean, you kind of get what you ask for with some of that, and we just try to steer clear of some of that. Domestic situations that, and again, we consider the fact that sometimes people say things that aren't true. Of course,
but these are things that, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, if there's multiple cases of that, it must be, come on now.
Well, and then you have to think, as a, I guess as the executive of my office, I hire this guy, and now he's a liability to my office. But especially if we didn't do a thorough background and I didn't have that information, I guess I could claim some ignorance here. But if we do a background, I know all of these things, and then we still hire him, it's just generally you've got such you just open yourselves up to civil liability that you just can't argue. You're going to have a hard time arguing that. And, we're stewards of the public's money, and every time we aren't successful in a lawsuit, that's the public's money that's at stake there. So, again, all that starts just from simply hiring. We're just into the hiring.
That's what
process.
I'm saying. That's the most important thing that people don't take into consideration, is that these may be issues in different areas based on funding, based on, is the structure of the business up to date? How they're doing their recruiting? Are they spending time in these areas? Are they not spending time in these areas when they should? And is it just because they've always done it that way? Like you said, it's not so much of course that's going to cost more money, but wouldn't you want to spend that on the front end to save you more money in the long run? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, and this, culminated a few years ago as well. and I've watched this kind of take place in lives of people who had previously worked or I'd worked with, and generally you hire somebody, we make them a deputy, and they go and they see the worst of society consistently. You see things probably in 1 year, traumatic events of just everything that you can imagine. In 1 year, I can tell you one of my road deputies are going to see more in 1 year of their life than most people would ever experience in an entirety of their life. Yeah. And so you do that. And then we do that year after year after year. And then they start having issues with whether it be alcohol or anything that they're leaning on, issues at home. Their marriage isn't successful. And then they become an issue as an employee, and they're gone. Well, they're 15 years in, and you've spent 15 years, of one thing I can't send somebody to a school and bring back 15 years of experience.
No, there's no way. No. Especially and based on the area, because every single area is different.
Right.
You're not going to get someone vetted, even if they're from another department, another state, and come to your area. The operations aren't going to be the same. The community's not going to be the same. Well,
so it's as important to take care of their mental health in that time, and make sure that our investment, that we. And I look at it like that. We invest in these people, and we get them to where they are. And when you lose them, you've lost everything that they have brought and learned and provided, to the agency. And generally, and I don't know that it works every time, but I will say I see it less now. And we implemented a mental health program. And again, this was prior to me being sheriff. I was in the administration, but something else I had approached to, and I'd personally gone through a traumatic event, had a new deputy that in literally weeks of him being out on his own had gone through 3 traumatic events, which included a double murder stabbing, 2 children that were shot by their father, and he killed himself, and then him being involved in a shooting, where rightfully so, shot the guy, and the guy had pulled a gun on him as well. But this guy's 6 months in, and young kids, all seen all of that, and we had a way that we did things back then. We sent them to a certain thing, to a kind of it's like peer. Where you sit in a group and all that stuff. And that works sometimes. Some people are okay in that setting, but we also have a lot of Type A personalities in our just in this profession, and so for them to sit in a group and say
and share,
that doesn't necessarily work all the time.
It doesn't work well, And
so, but it can. But again, that can't be the only option.
Right.
And so we'd sent the guy to that, and he came back in, and I knew what my experience had been, and so I'd set him down and say, "Hey, tell me what you think about." All of how that transpired, and what you think about the mental health piece of that. And he's like, "Well, you want me to be honest about it?" I was like, "Well, that's kind of why I'm asking." He said, "Well, if I was going to say something, I probably wouldn't have said it in that environment." I said, "Good to know." So we used to have a doctor here, Dr. Darrell Tuberville, died a few years ago, and man, what an asset he was to our community. He was a chaplain. He's actually written some books you can read. I mean, he's an incredible individual. He passed away a few years ago, but I called him. He come and met with me, and I kind of told him what I was thinking, that we needed to do something different for our employees, and I just didn't know exactly what was out there, particularly locally here. You go to a big city, there's things that may be available we don't have. Well, he actually had a team of counselors that were first responder-based counselors, to the point they would come literally get in a patrol car with a deputy if that's what they needed, and ride with them in their environment where they're comfortable, if that's what it took. Here in Bossier, one of the counselors works for the fire department here in Bossier, and so talked to him and told him everything I was thinking, and of course he basically said, "You're absolutely right. You have to have options. Some people can go through a traumatic event, they process it completely fine and move on with life. Others, they may process it in the moment, and it makes itself known later, and So everybody's not the same, so you got to have options. So we decided what we were going to do is basically, if it's even close to a traumatic event, we send everybody to go see the counselors. And then if the counselor decides they need to keep coming, then they keep coming as long as they need to. So that's one piece of it. But sometimes you don't catch that. Like, it may not be a traumatic event, and immediately after that, it could be a culmination of a bunch of events.
Right.
So now we offer, it's 3 sessions a year, regardless of, we don't even know about it. I mean, they book it directly with a counselor.
Okay, so and
it's not something
they have to put a request into, right, and let it be known that they have vulnerabilities.
Right.
Yeah.
No, they don't have to do that, and it doesn't matter if it's marriage counseling. It doesn't matter, what type of counseling they're looking for. They can go and they can get that counseling, and if the counselor decides that they should keep coming, then we work with them from there. But I mean, they can go. I can have a guy go today, and I would, other than them telling me, through an employee number, when they bill it, I mean, that's what we have out there that's available, and that seems to work super well. And we utilize it quite a bit, and so that, again, that's as important as the bank taking care of your money.
Yeah.
We invest in these people, and again, these are people we're a larger agency, but I mean, we live with these people more than we live at home. And so we're family with each other. And the last thing you want to see is one of them's life fall apart. And, used to, you kind of sat by the sidelines and you'd say, man, what happened to that guy? And it's like, I can't tell you this for certain, but I mean, we kind of built that person up. I mean, we sent him into all these crazy things and to see just crazy stuff and then wonder why, he's not making sense right now.
Yeah.
It's because you just kind of let him, and we, and I'm sure, you seem to be kind of that way too, kind of a type A personality. We're the ones that are supposed to be the strength for everybody else.
Right.
We hold up the community, and so we don't want to tell you because, that's for us to deal with, and that's rough on.
Yeah, that's an issue.
This profession.
That's an issue that. Yeah, it's huge in these industries, any of these industries, right? Whether it be police, fire, any type of first responder, right? Because you have so much responsibility, and you're looked to as some sort of resolve, and you don't want to put the burden of your issues on someone else because you're seen as the person that's supposed to be helping.
Right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I didn't know that about you guys either, but I think that's amazing. I think that's something everyone needs to look into, and I'm sure even if you don't have the funding within your infrastructure, I feel like there should be some type of state funded, grants or something that promotes that. And if not, that we need to, push for those things because it's something that is not talked about enough. It's like, why are these issues happening? Are these issues that are going on in these departments, with, police officers versus, with civilians, altercations, things that are taken out of context, things that are looked at the wrong way, or why did they do these things? Were they at fault? Is there pre-existing conditions?
Right.
How have we analyzed these issues? Are we just like throwing people out there in the wild and saying, hey, go do your job and, deal with it? Right. Sorry, it's part of the job.
Yeah,
comes with the territory.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that happens a lot. I know it does because I've seen it firsthand with people I know.
Right.
They get thrown into an issue and they're just like, it's the culture. It's just like having a conversation with another police officer about things that transpired. If you were to have that same if I'm going to have a conversation, just because I know the world, so I'm okay having it, and I've had things I've dealt with in the past, so it's easy for me to talk about. But if you just go talk to another individual and talk to them the same way, we're transferring information that may come off as extremely harsh, but it's because you're hardened because you've experienced so many things,
right?
And that could take a huge emotional toll on you in the long run,
right? Well, it's kind of strange, there's you can find pictures in traumatic scenes and sometimes it's put out there publicly as a negative thing, and you may see there's something terrible has happened and you see 2 firemen or 2 police officers and they're smiling. This is a traumatic situation, but what's not considered in those situations is that's survival for those. They compartmentalize. This is work. Because if I don't compartmentalize it like that, then I'm going to be no good to you.
You can't do your job if you're emotionally invested in every situation.
And you may be you may deal with that later,
right?
At home or wherever that may be. But it's one of those things that's a survival technique. You compartmentalize that in the moment. We're working, and you just kind of disconnect from the seriousness of, or at least the emotional aspect of the moment. Sometimes that's just to survive. Because if not, you'd go. I mean, that moment that whoever's family's involved in, or whatever the case may be, that tragic accident or car wreck or whatever, that's a moment in people's lives that's probably the most traumatic moment, could be the most traumatic moment they ever lived through. Yeah. And, these guys that are wearing a badge live through that day in, day out. Like, that's not it. We do that in our parish probably 20 times a year just in car wrecks. That's not including every other, tragedy that happens. And so, that's again, all of that is where we have to be. There's a mental adjustment that goes on. We just have to make sure we keep it in check.
Yeah, it's just a way of processing that information during that time, and that's something that I think too is should be, or if it isn't, part of the training process, and then also downloading that information later on and how you deal with it, right?
Right.
And not putting it all together at one time. Maybe processing each one of those issues as they come, as they arise.
Sure.
Well, so what about like with the training aspect and with the the mental, everyone, I always hear this, like when you start at the parish, like you have to go work in the prison first. Is that still the case? It's not the case in your parish?
It is in some, but
okay. Why is that?
Generally, that's the place they have the most openings, And
so that's just like where the first, if they want to jump in real quick, they got to take that.
And even today, generally, to be a patrol officer, you have to be post-certified, complete an academy.
Right.
And that's gone from 8 weeks to, generally 15, 16 weeks now. So most people that are working in a jail, and again, that varies agency to agency, but a lot of those people that are working in a jail, they go to a 96-hour, I think it's 96-hour, jailer school, correctional school, and then they can work in that facility, but they can't work in any other law enforcement capacity.
Okay.
So one of the reasons that they put them there is they can get them to work quick.
Okay.
And then a lot of those facilities never post-certify you as long as you stay in the correctional facility, only if you're going to transfer out to another area. Now, we don't necessarily do that. We generally hire for the position. If we have jail openings, we have road openings, we certainly offer that internally to whoever may want to transfer.
Gotcha.
And occasionally we do have a transfer, but then, a lot of those guys that work in our correctional facility, they like that. It never rains back there.
Yeah.
It's generally the same temperature all year round.
Yeah.
So there's some aspects that are, positive. Now, I will say for those because there are agencies that's just their cycle.
Yeah, I've just heard that multiple times. I was like, how's that work?
And so, Bossier Parish, for example, generally their cycle is, it doesn't matter what your qualifications are, you're going to work in the jail for an extended period of time and then move out to the road.
Why do you think that is?
Well, again, I think it would vary agency to agency, but I think the thought is, and I see that even for those that we do that with, is you work in the correctional facility, you interact with people of the criminal element, but for the most part, you learn how to interact in a way that that can be, you can be respectful to those individuals, and obviously that's in a correctional facility, that's a concentration of people who potentially have committed crimes.
Yes.
And potentially could commit more crimes as well. And so, they get the experience of how to interact with those individuals. They get the experience of learning, I guess, the tricks of the trade, because you'd be surprised at how many people that we have come to jail, and they kind of share things with you, of how things are going, or how crimes being committed, in your area, and so, they learn to interact, but then be respectful, and so I guess what you have a lot of times is the people that they would interact with on the street.
They wouldn't give them the same there wouldn't be the same element there of respect because they haven't had time to interact with those people. So they just immediately see them as a threat and maybe excessive force, stuff like that.
No, I don't necessarily know that. I think it's more the deputies' interaction and I mean the whoever you're dealing with in the public, had they been in a correctional facility before and interacted with this officer or deputy, there's almost a level of respect that's already built there.
Yeah, there's some sort of relationship.
They know them.
Yeah.
And particularly, those that are fair, respectful, many times what you find is that they'll be more open and talk more openly to that person that they have knowledge of and that they've learned to respect in that correctional setting. And so, there's a positive about working back there. You learn, how to deal with one, you learn, like, particularly somebody who has drug issues, them when they're sober. So you get to, you see them on the street and they're not, so you have all of the, and they know, that kind of thing. And so, there is definitely a wealth of knowledge to bring to the street. I think, if that's a cycle that works, for the amount of openings that you would have, and again, retention. If you take somebody who's their ambitions are to be on the street, and it's 10 years before they ever make it to the road, that can create some retention issues because they're going to go at some point to where they feel led. But I will say too, there's also in most correctional facilities there's a benefit to stay in a sheriff's office where you have both pieces. There's sometimes a benefit to stay in that setting because there are higher turnovers in that correctional setting, and particularly in you got sheriff's offices that are small in the state. Wynn Parish, for example, that's a really small sheriff's office as far as the enforcement side of things, but they have 300 to 400 workers, probably one of the largest employers in Wynn Parish that work in there. They have I guess you would call it's a federal detention type facility that's operated. And so, in that setting, your potential for moving to higher positions generally is going to happen faster. So if you're looking at that aspect of things of how can I move up faster, well, that's probably going to be a setting you can do that in. Yeah. As in the in the street level of things, a lot of those guys get there, and they probably not going to they're going to be in those positions for a while, and so it can be a little stagnant.
Yeah, because you're not going to see as much turnover in that area, and it's just growing the ladder.
Right.
Growing the ladder there is going to take a while. Yeah, that makes sense. So how long have you been doing this? What age did you start doing this?
18.
You're 18 years old, so you just went straight out of high school into law enforcement. Okay.
Sure did.
What made you make that decision?
So my mother was a deputy police officer from the time I was probably 4 or 5 years old. My stepdad, who raised me, which was I call him my dad. He's always been my dad. He's been there since I was probably about 4 or 5. And he was a state trooper at the time. And my family, my uncle was a game warden. My aunt was the police chief in the town of Logansport. My great uncle was a sheriff's deputy back when they only had 5 total deputies at the sheriff's office. That was back in the the early years. And then I had a distant relative that was previous sheriff, 4 or 5 sheriffs before me, and so not that I don't know that particularly had an influence on me, but more so my direct family and my best friends, all of their dads, and it was just
you were in that
family.
You grew up in that culture,
and so that was just what I wanted to do. And I don't know that I know certainly that my dad kind of pushed me, into I was going to college too, and he kind of pushed me into going a different route. And I would say it's probably because of the same way we see things today is when he was a police officer, things had changed so dramatically, and that was back in 2000. So, he had seen that dramatic change, and you really need to consider this. And back then too, working at the sheriff, even working for the state police, they didn't pay anything. Yeah. You're going to make less than $2,000 a month probably, and you just wasn't going to be a lucrative decision by any means. And he used to tell me, it was like, listen, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But no, you'll never have a nice house, and you'll never have a new car and all that kind of stuff. And at the moment he said that, certainly he was right. But that I started when I was 18. The previous sheriff allowed me to serve as a reserve deputy, and I was doing like 20 hours a week, and then just like that didn't last very long, and I went full time as a police officer because my mother worked at the sheriff's office, and at that moment the sheriff's office was small enough. The sheriff that had come in had kind of started wanting to cut out some of the nepotism that was there, and it was a small agency, so you had husbands and wives and all that kind of stuff, and so he was trying to reduce some of that, and so he'd already done all of that, and then I'd been trying to go to work there, and he the whole nepotism deal just wasn't going to happen, and so I went to work at a police department locally, and worked there for a couple of years, and then I'd applied. Actually, I don't know that I had applied again, but I was literally about to starve to death, and so I'd gotten married, and when I was single, that little bit of money I was making was okay, I guess. I could survive on it, but the moment I got married, it wasn't going nowhere. So I actually left and went to work at a friend of mine's business that is an oil field business, and I was gone about 35 days, and Sheriff Arbuckle called and said, hey, you want to go to work? It's like, man, I've been trying to go to work for years. Of course I want to go to work. So he told me to show up next week. So I did, and that was 20 years ago now. So that's been and that's what's crazy. That's been such a fast ride of how we've gone from there to here in that amount of time. But my mother still, she retired about a month ago. She worked for me for the last 5 years. And
that's awesome.
That was unique.
Awesome. Yeah, that's awesome.
Unique for sure. So, and another aspect of that, and it's one I don't know whether you know or not, but when I was a young kid, I was about 12 years old. My biological father was not a good fella. He was quite the violent type, particularly towards women, and had a history of he was abusive to my mother. Had attempted to hurt her, kill her on several occasions when she was when I was a baby, and even maybe before that. But ultimately, they divorced. I really couldn't have anything to do with him. Courts had kind of cut all that out, and so I didn't really see him a lot. Other than, he kind of stalked me as a kid. Ball fields were like 2 blocks away from the house, and I'd ride a bicycle, and he'd make sure that occasionally he would just be sitting there, so you knew it was a control thing. I'm in control.
Right.
So we actually moved around a little bit out of the local area, and kind of got away from that. Well, we'd moved back. My stepdad, he was the on-call detective one night. My mother was a police officer at the town of Logansport, and we had all gone to the movies that night. Well, on the way home, my dad, being the on-call detective, gets a call about a situation, and so we end up making our way that way. And my biological father, him and his estranged wife had split up, and she had been basically in some protective, like a woman's shelter where you can't find her.
Got you.
But they had 2 half sisters, and she came back, if I remember correctly, because she was trying to get custody of them, which she didn't have at that point. Neither did he, but she was staying with some friends of theirs, and he found out about it, drove over there. He shot 2 people in the yard, killed first one instantly, goes in, she's on the phone with law enforcement, he shoots her, kills another guy that was pretty bad off health-wise, and then comes back out. Deputies end up there and arrest him, and ultimately he was tried and convicted and sentenced to death on death row. He ended up passing away about a year and a half ago, if I remember correctly, on death row, not from just from health reasons.
Yeah, got you.
But so that was another piece of the puzzle for me that kind of put me.
Yeah, I mean that's rough,
where I'm
man.
at.
That's rough,
well,
man.
And so I guess the part that I left out of that was, we ended up on the scene because my dad was like, we didn't necessarily know what initially. I mean, you're talking bag phone days,
Yeah,
the full rundown,
exactly,
real time, So we get there. Obviously, they kind of realize what's going on, but I was 12 at the time, and remember watching one of the guys that he had shot was still alive at the moment and passed away, literally with us sitting there. And I still recall that like it was yesterday. So that had a lot of influence on me too, as to. Certainly that is. I don't want to say I'm trying to make up for anything because I'm not. Because I didn't. I think everybody's their own person. But if I can do enough good, and I don't know that you ever can, but I certainly want to counter. And as well as anybody that's going to do that to anybody else, I want to be on the other side of that to make sure that one, that they're held accountable, and two, that we do what we can for a victim's family. Because it's a super weird situation, for me as a kid trying to process all that stuff.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, that's a lot. And, you already had, just growing up with the conflict of constantly looking over your mother, looking over her shoulder the whole time, you looking over your shoulder the whole time, then that happening and seemed like sort of a resolve for you. But at the same time, on the other side, how much loss was connected to that. Yeah, I can only imagine. That's a lot.
Yeah, and that's the. Truthfully, that's the best way, I guess, to put it. Was there was finally the ability to breathe at that moment.
But at the same time, people lost their lives for that. It's a hard trade off.
Yeah, that was a unique situation to experience, and one certainly that I think impacted. Me, but everybody else that was involved in that, and it's kind of a. I don't know. It was just one of those things that I think. Obviously, I know it changed me. In my perspective, and even changed, I think, the maturity of me in my life as far as, that, I don't know, that's just a lot to process.
Yeah.
To be able to process
at
it,
that
there has
age,
to be some maturity that what you're going to get whether you want it or not.
Yeah.
And so, that again, that happened all in the parish that I'm the sheriff of now. So it's quite strange to, I even had that as a political attack when I ran for office the first time, as somebody trying to connect those dots, and that did not, the public didn't take very kindly to that. But, it's one of those, certainly I don't feel responsible, and anybody would try to make me feel responsible. That's fine if they want to try that, but I'm good with it. But again, the experience certainly moved me to be, as I guess, driven to try to do the opposite of that, to give back and to protect folks as opposed to being a predator.
Yeah. Was your mom, was she a police officer at the time all this transpired?
She was not when
it initially happened, like when you were young, she wasn't?
When all that happened initially, when she was going through the abuse, no, she was not.
Do you think that pushed her to be one as well? Do you think going through that may have? Or?
I think it could certainly. I don't know that we've ever had that discussion, but I would imagine that had something to do with it. Our family, my mom's side, her family was, they were, and still are. Obviously, they're like, salt of the earth, good people. They don't, they don't just do good because somebody's looking. They do good because that's what you do, and and so in a small town, particularly like Logansport, that was 1,500 people. Everybody. So, like those kind of jobs like that would be something that, you would try to do, particularly as a young single mother when you're looking for insurance and things like that, So some of that all I'm sure played into it, but then again, I'm sure for her sake, some sense of, because at that point, obviously he's still there,
Exactly.
And so having that family of law enforcement around you was probably of some comfort.
That's what I would think. Imagine have something to do with it. But yeah. Well, what do you think? What have you experienced through all this to where, looking at it now, like what's something you never would have expected to go through, whether it be good or bad, in this entire run?
There's a lot of obviously political things that were rough. Politics is a monster today. You better not wear your feelings on your sleeve. I can assure you of that. But I will tell you that the saltiness of that, the just how things can, how even in the small. I mean, you expect some of that on national political levels, but locally, where you literally see these people every day, you some of these people you've known your entire life, and they say certain things or just some of it's just so low you just shake your head at it, and you just think, because I can't, that was my deal. Like if I got to win by talking. By telling you why you shouldn't vote for the other guy. Exactly. I felt like that's most people's run out of stuff to tell you about me.
That's most people's campaign is putting the other person down because they don't have enough accolades to bring themselves, to present themselves as something of some sort of official.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, obviously that's one of the things, but probably the biggest thing that I had as far as a struggle was, I lost a deputy. We had not done that in my 17-year career.
Gotcha.
We had not. Well, I'll say that we had one that was technically not on duty, but he was in uniform. And it was a good friend of mine that passed away just a year or so prior to me becoming sheriff. That was tough and tragic. I actually had to deliver that death notice to his parents and wife, and that's just something nobody wants to do.
No.
And then had another deputy killed in a car accident, hit by somebody that was under the influence, coming to work one morning, and that was pretty rough to deal with. She had been trying to go to work she was a state probation parole officer, and had been trying to go to work for us, and was working her way through the test, had taken the test multiple times, and was just an incredible person, positive. Just one of those people that walks in the room and the room gets better.
Yeah.
Never has a bad day. Yeah. That kind of person. And so, she had only been working for us for about a year, but had been working with us as a state probation parole officer for several years. We kind of, I would say we recruited her because of, that contagious personality, her the way she handled herself in business. And so that was kicking the pants for sure.
I bet, yeah.
And then we lost another one a few years later, but she was working an off-duty detail, had a heart issue, and died while on duty. And those things are things that I don't know that you ever, you don't just become okay with all of that. Those are something every time it happens, it's like the first time, and it certainly it's something that nobody wants to go through, especially a new sheriff, and try to guide everybody through that while also trying to keep yourself together, in that situation. And so those are probably the biggest shockers, I guess, you have, because of all the time that I'd spent at our agency prior to that, we never dealt with that.
Right.
So, and then of course, we go into, we'd had one. Well, we had a deputy shot, which he ended up living, wasn't a life-threatening situation. But then the young deputy I was talking about earlier, we'd had that shooting that he was involved in, chased a guy all the way up to Blanchard, and I think he'd robbed a casino over here in Bossier, and for some reason comes to DeSoto Parish. But anyway, we ended up with him, but that was a 17-year span. We had those two in 17 years. I take over in March. In July, we have a shooting involving multiple officers. Then, since then, from the time I took over till a few years ago, and knock on wood, I hope I'm not jinxing myself now, but we've had 5 total that included an officer shot. Those types of situations that we really didn't deal with those.
Right.
And so certainly I never want anybody to be shot, but to be able to have been exposed to the experience of all of that would have been helpful, instead of flying by the seat of your pants. But, again, that's where all that mental health stuff that was prepared before came into play. We'd run these scenarios out should these things happen. And so all those things worked the way they should, and everything was good. And all of my deputies walked away from those situations, even the one that was shot. Certainly could have been a much different situation there. But, that was, I guess, one of the biggest things that just was like a 1,000-pound weight on your shoulders.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Is, like, please stop. Like, this needs to stop.
Yeah.
But again, 17 years and we deal with it twice. And in my first 3, we had done it 5 times, and certainly makes you stay awake at night sometimes.
Yeah, I bet so. Well, you what's your stance on like all these crime issues that we're dealing with currently, and like where are you guys at on that? As far as like, what would you say would be the best way to battle these issues, and not so much head on, but just an all inclusive approach?
Yeah. So one of the things that's become super important to me, because I've watched things transpire through the legislative sessions previously, is starting in 2017, and this is indicative of Louisiana, but this is indicative of the country as a whole. We rolled back certain penalties because Louisiana at that time had the highest incarceration rate. We had 49,000 people in jail in 2017. We have 26-ish now, roughly, DOC, Department of Corrections prisoners. So we have basically half of the amount of prisoners that we had in jail in 2017. But ironically, we have double the violent crime.
Right.
So I'm not a mathematician. That is not my strong suit. But if you're only keeping half of the people in that were committing crimes, obviously of some serious nature, you let all those people out, and now there's this spike in crime. I don't care what anybody tells me. They can bring me a graph or statistic. It doesn't matter. I can only tell you what I see realistically on the ground, and that is that they are directly related. We're letting people out who have proved that they are not going to be functional in society to a positive nature, and we let them out over and over and over again. So what I think, and I can prove some of that. Obviously, I can't prove everybody's statistics, but I can generally prove locally to our area. Even with Sheriff Prater, he has probably a larger statistically, he's got a larger pool of data to pull from, but it's that we aren't seeing all of these new criminals. We are seeing the same criminals commit multiple crimes. So when you say violent crime doubles, what they don't say is that we've had the same people commit multiple crimes that previously should not have had that opportunity because they would have been incarcerated. I don't know. Well, I do know that the underlying problem is not something solvable by law enforcement. What law enforcement has become in society is the fishnet of nothing else caught the problem, and so we end up having to deal with it. Mental health is gigantic. We don't really have a whole lot of mental health, particularly long-term mental health facilities. Almost are non-existent here.
Yeah. You have to drive them all to Brentwood, right?
Well, Brentwood's not a long-term.
Right, that's not long-term. That's just short-term. Get them there and then figure out where to go from there.
We had one in Pineville for some time, and there's one they call Jackson down in Jackson Parish. That's it's a decent-sized one, but there are. What I would tell you about the incarceration of my facility is we hold 151 people. We're probably not maxed out on any given day, but there are a percentage of those, and I would, I'm going to be conservative and say a quarter probably should be getting mental health treatment as opposed to being in my facility. But what happens is they don't get that mental health treatment, and then they commit a crime, and then I have no choice but to do something with them. And so what we are, and that's across the country, same story. I don't care.
I've heard that multiple times.
Whether you go to New York City or you come to the smallest town, in Louisiana, what you're going to find is you have those people that they just don't have options of how to take care of them, and so the law enforcement ends up dealing with that issue. So to go back to the root of the problem is that what we see now, particularly with Shreveport, but that is we see on a smaller scale some of that in our parish as well, is juveniles that are committing all of these crimes. I mean, that's my lap's been buzzing here, and it's because prior to coming in here, I was texting and calling about a bill that is going to be up for debate, I think next week, related to the housing of certain juveniles. You can't get juveniles in any facility. They're all booked completely up. It's a problem. It's got to be fixed. Number one, that has to be done. So, we're working on some solutions for that. But a lot of the negative run-ins, all of them wouldn't be fair to say, but a lot of the run-ins that we have with people, and if you watch videos and things like that of the negative interactions with law enforcement, what you will see is non-compliance.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying there's not some example out there, because, I mean, certainly we understand that law enforcement is not some non-human species that are not flawed.
There's some bad apples.
And so there's some out there.
Yeah.
And so I'll never, ever say that we don't have problems that we need to fix. But if you see those situations where, there's non-compliance, there's all this anti-authority, that does not start in that place. That is where it culminates. It starts in school. It starts with either, lack of parents or there could be a parent, but the inability or the lack of structure to that parent, or maybe they're not in the best position when they have a kid to they may be working through things themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that lack of structure moves into school, and again, that's not a 100% thing. There are people who they obviously make their own decisions and they choose to go down the wrong road. It can be drugs or anything, but I think that holistically we have that issue of where that authority is not, it's not respected here. It's not respected in elementary school, middle school, high school. And then when all of that was just disrespectful and they just got in trouble or sent to detention, well, in the real world, when you become an adult, like that doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. And so when you run into a situation with law enforcement and you've got, this nature of non-compliance, well, I mean, that in itself creates many of these situations that we see. But that's also, I think, what we see just with the criminal, when you're asking about crime, mm-hmm. I think that's what you tend to see. I mean, you see people do very, very terrible things, and there are people that stand up and say, well, it wasn't their fault. They were good people.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that's fine, but ultimately it was their fault.
Yeah.
They make decisions, but that's where we get to as we start removing responsibility from any individual anymore. And again, you find that across the board with most major cities that I mean, you'd be surprised at, you can arrest a juvenile, and I promise you would think in an interview that they're talking to a 30-year hardened criminal, that just in the way they talk in response to law enforcement, I mean, as if they've been doing this forever and ever, and I mean, it's something you would have to hear. I mean, you couldn't believe it that they would have the level of just that they. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are or what I've done, that I've been caught with a stolen gun. What you gonna do about it? I mean, that's kind of the attitude.
Yeah, and I think it's important. And I think it's interesting too that you laid that out that way, because I that makes sense. Like, because most of the time we're like, when anyone's asked that question, especially in politics, it's like, well, we need to stop drugs and we need to stop this, and this is an issue here, this one specific issue. But I mean, it does come from, it has to start somewhere, and if you start trying to regulate it at an early age, then that's not going to grow into a problem later on. You're right. I mean, I completely agree. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
I'm an examples person, or visual, I guess. And so, it's kind of like if you're trying to take care of your pool at home and, you got some algae in your pool. Well, you can, if you're, this much off on one chemical, but you're this much off on another chemical, where, let's see, you're 80% low on a particular chemical and you're 2% low on this chemical. Well, if you want to, and I'm referencing this to when we talk about problems, there are many small problems in that we can talk about of, well, we need to fix this, we need to fix that, we need to fix this. There's many small problems, but that's fine. But should we use our energy focusing on the
nitpicking the one little thing?
You can run to the store and just grab the 2% chemical and throw it in there.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
If the chemical that you're 80% low on, if we all focus our attention on that and fix that, man, then we're just dealing with the minor things. But that's the thing
because you're always going to have crime.
Absolutely.
But if you're letting a continuous influx of, these young individuals grow into that, environment to where they think it's okay and there's no accountability. And that's another thing we're faced with in society as well, is less accountability these days, which makes it even harder on, people like what you do, because it's like you have society grooming these people that they don't have to be accountable for all these things they do or say, on social media or whatever it may be. And then finally they get in a position of where they are held accountable, and then they try to lay the fault on you.
Right.
And that's just unfortunate the times we live in right now. So it's an uphill battle.
Sure. Well, and that's just, that's the nature of the political beast, I would say, is there's always got to be a scapegoat, and, somebody's got to carry, there's never it's rare that people say, yeah, they did some wrong stuff, but I did too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not
I would love you to find me some examples of that, because it's rare. But, I guess that's the, to me, the bigger picture. And again, I say that to say law enforcement needs to work on some things, but as far as how you stop where the moral compass, I guess, of everything is heading, is like the law enforcement's interaction is the culmination of a long list of broken issues. Like, we're just where it doesn't go past.
It comes to the head. It comes to the head at you.
Yeah. And so when we deal with it, there's consequences, and that's generally the problem from there down, is there's few. But that goes back to where we are with with laws and things in the country, and particularly in our state. 2017, we started letting people out.
Why is that? Is it just someone decided to convince them that it was overpopulation, we're spending too much money housing? Because at the same time, you're spending just as much money and resources, constantly arresting these people, running through the system, and then putting them back out.
Well, so you're talking logic. You're talking logic now.
But that doesn't apply to politics, does it?
Yeah, that's where things get lost. Is when you start applying that logic of saying, absolutely, you may have saved, let's say there's 50% of the people in jail, so you get to say that we saved 50% of that money.
Right.
Well, you might have, but what we did in the community, on top of the fact that there's a victim, that's the part that gets lost in all, and that's the part that probably makes me as mad and passionate as any of it is, listen, I understand money, but on my hierarchy of what things matter to me, it's population, victim, citizens, number one, and then what our finances come below that, because if that isn't number one, then we don't. If basically our finances are number one, then we put the needs of the citizens and our responses as something that is secondary in our decisions, and that should not be that case. If we don't have If we set our needs and where those need to be, and we need more money, then that's when we go to the public and tell them that.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily. But again, that's the point, is that when they save money here, the victims that shouldn't have been, that are, and whatever their loss is, along with the community. Because what happens is, if you're not housing them and they commit another crime, then we're housing them on the dollar of the local taxpayer in the parish, at the expense of the local taxpayer.
Yeah.
Now, all of it's tax money, but you're taking the money that's supposed to go directly to things in the community or to the operation of our correctional facility, and employees, and we're spending it on housing and feeding and all that kind of stuff. So just because I spent the dollar here and you didn't spend it there, that's you know.
I mean, I completely agree. And another thing too is if you have this environment of criminal activity, then it's going to take away from the surplus and sales tax taken in that area too. On retail and people going out and doing things, it's going to hurt the community on that level. It's going to hurt the community on how the community interacts with each other. Are they going to have community events anymore with each other? Do they feel safe doing those things because these things are an issue now? Like it just affects. It's a snowball effect.
It is, and then what you tend to see is that when that, and there's examples all across the country of that, but when that element starts to win, when crime starts to become something that you can't confine or predict as far as areas of where that may be, or you just it doesn't matter where in that community you are, that you're just as likely to be victim of a violent crime, or your car being carjacked or things like that. Well, then what happens is those people that can afford to begin to move out of that community.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help the community.
No, it's going to hurt them. It's going to hurt them.
And so there's generally at least two things that make a community grow. One is going to be schools and the ability for positive, growing schools that are doing well, and and all those things. But then obviously the second thing is going to be the safety of that area, and all of that affects your property values. And so, that's like you have to almost treat that as its own baby when you're on the in the hierarchy of parish government or whatever you're at. Like if you can't get those few things right, you will find no town that increases population, or no community parish that increases population, that those first two things that I told you aren't there.
Yeah.
When those two things, when you lose one of them, population decreases. When you lose them both, it's not even a decrease; it's a run for the border. And so that's those are tough things to deal with. And the problem you tend to find is, as those things start to happen, then you end up with the local community struggling for employees. It's a cycle that's tough, and I certainly don't know the answer to that. But
you've seen over time multiple areas go through those cycles, and then the ones that have been able to replenish, someone had to come in there and make a change from how things were going, and unfortunately, that just always has to happen. It just takes that team of individuals or that one individual to, assemble a team of individuals. Sure. It happens. It's horrible to think about, but we've been through this throughout history for hundreds of years. Yeah. Like we know what the issue is, but for some reason there's always some kind of argument because there's some kind of other agenda tied to it that's going to save money somewhere, make some more money somewhere else.
Sure. Well,
it's frustrating.
What we run into today is again, we go back to politics, and politics is the football that we throw at each other. And so you can't get out and or it's unusual, particularly the ones that are making the decisions. It's very unusual to be able to sit down and have a conversation and understand each other, like in that political world. Again, I don't necessarily live in that level of political world, but in that world, it's more about, we already know our stances are separate, so can I yell louder than you? Exactly. Or do I have more friends than you have?
If we're going to find a resolve, it's going to be one that benefits both of us. Right. You know what I mean? We're running in with both of them. Like, here's my agenda, here's your agenda. We both are not going to change no matter what you say to us. But if we can come to some sort of agreement, if it's an agreement, it's going to have to benefit both of us. If it doesn't benefit one or the other, we're not going to sit down and have a conversation. Right. Like, it's just it's unfortunate.
It's a rough go. With that these days.
Yeah, man. I never even dive into the depths of that, or just because it's like, you can say all you want, man. That is always going to exist in society, and it's just like, if you can find your way to work around it and just, I feel like, be honest, do what you say you're going to do, then you can kind of avoid those things.
Sure. And I guess the part that bewilders me sometimes is the fact that I can't that the root of everything is, there's no way you make me believe that the few things that I think are important and the few things that you probably think are important, and anybody else we should bring in this room that is a productive member of society, that if they sat there, that they wouldn't think the same things are important, which is that, one, I want to be safe in my home. I want to, if I want to, whatever I choose to do for a living, I want to be able to do it, and be respected and make a living. I generally think that's what people want. And then I don't want you to come take everything that's mine, that I work for. I think those three basic things are things that people want, and they want to be able to have their kids, and they want their kids to be safe, and they want them to be educated, and they want them to have a future. And I think most of us, when we become adults and we have kids, we kind of stop thinking about or we should stop thinking about me, and you start thinking about making sure your kids, move forward in life, and they're able to be successful. And I think that's the lens that if we're not, we should be looking through. Is we're kind of, by the time you turn 30 years old, and I would say that's probably making you older than you necessary.
Right,
you're pretty
but
much
these days
set in your ways.
Yeah.
Now, people can change and grow and learn and all of that, but their trajectory is set. And I think all of that, to say that, I think that all goes back to when we want to fix the problems that are going on in our community and our country, knowing what I just said, and statistically you can prove that, and that's actually, you should probably bring that down about 10 years. But generally, people's lives and their trajectories are set, and there are people that are obviously, there's that percentage that can change and do things. But man, if we affect that in between those two set points of
you
the
see
success.
You see that, not to beat a dead horse, but you see that even in criminals who have been reformed. They'll come back and give to those communities.
Right.
And those communities build them up and say, these people, were on the streets. They did all these things. They've since, got their shit together, and they came back, and now they're giving back to the community. So even on that side of the fence, that it's important to those individuals too, because they realize it's important,
Right.
Shaping your youth and knowing that the generation coming up behind you is just as important as you, or actually more important than you, because if they're not, then how is this cycle going to continue to grow?
Well, I think one of the big things, again, it's our focus now, is as far as law enforcement goes. We recognized in the last couple of years that we've always, as sheriffs, we've always had a political influence at our state capitol, and as much as we could have at the federal level. But we recognized in the last few years that there are some things that get by us that we've not necessarily, and again, it can be the way the bill's written, just in the title. There's hundreds of bills written, pre-filed every year, just in the way they're written. It may never catch your attention and look as if it's some harmless piece of legislation, but if you don't look at the text, it could have dramatic effects. And so we're way more conscious of that now. And so we have a bigger presence, but our presence isn't to go down and mess with things that are I guess in the scheme of public safety don't make a difference. That's not our game to play. But when it comes to public safety, we have got to be in the crafting, in the discussions, in the testimonies, all of those things. Like, we can't just take for granted they're going to come out the way we think they need to. We have to be physically there, and when it's not a good thing for our communities, we have to be, not just present but vocal, and on record when they make those votes, and putting pressure on our local politicians, our local senators and representatives, that what we expect, because we know what the outcome is. We may not necessarily tell you what's politically expedient, but we know what could help and could harm public safety. And so that's something that's just super that we have as sheriffs, particularly law enforcement leaders, period. We have to be involved in that. We can't be
Well, yeah, because people turn to you for answers for certain. When you're in a certain scenario where something happens, and they're saying, "Well, why is something not being done about X, Y, Z?" And you're going to say, "Because of these things," and we're working on that.
Right.
And that's or we have no control. Whatever it may be. But yes, you need to be educated on those things. And if you're not, then you're just doing your entire community, a disservice.
Right. Well, there's some expected changes. I don't know that this legislative session is the one where we're going to see dramatic legislative change, but I would expect the upcoming sessions in the next year and probably the following year, we're going back. We've learned what doesn't work with what was changed, and it's our opportunity to go back and make those changes that are certainly, again, there are people that can be, whether it's rehabilitated or that can make changes and don't necessarily need to be in prison for the rest of their lives, but there are people who have proved themselves. I mean, I was listening to an example. There was a big tragic incident recently. I won't say which one it was, but you pull the history out of this particular individual, and since January last year, there's 12, 13 arrests for felony crimes, including weapons and all that kind of stuff. And it's like you look at that, and now something tragic has happened. And I mean, it's like getting on a map and you draw a line from Shreveport to Dallas. Well, if you stay on that road long enough, you're going to get to Dallas. It's like you see somebody who's on that road, and it's telling in the way they're living their lives and the actions they're taking. They're pretty much right now. Well, at some point, we're going to find that spot where somebody is going to be hurt or killed. Yeah, and the point is in the criminal justice system is you try to curb that so that, again, it should be less about the person that's the criminal and more about the victim. But then you go lifespan of these particular, and give you 100 examples if you wanted them, but there's 30, 40 serious crimes, and because of some of them, because of justice reinvestment, you could have been convicted of attempted murder and got out of jail early, and then been convicted of all of these other crimes that could be violent, but you're out, or whatever plea deals you come up with, and then you've got this history of being this violent felon, drug related, like not just having drugs, but being a drug dealer, and I catch you with a firearm, and that should be a very serious crime. That, obviously you don't have that to go do good deeds with, right? So, that should be a big one. Mm-hmm. And right now, that's not a crime that if that's one of those early release crimes that you're going to get out, you're going to do just a small percentage of time. If you get 10 years, if you do 2.5, and I'm talking real numbers, if you do 2.5, that's a long time. Damn. And so, that's the part that's like we make those we put those people back out to commit crimes again and have victims, and then we just call it tragedies, and we want to defer attention to objects as opposed to people, and so those are the things that legislatively we have to fix. And I don't want to say 100% confidence, but I'm pretty confident that we are going to make some headway on that, in the next couple of years. But that's a constant back and forth. I mean, we see the opposite of that. You go to Oregon, and they, like drugs, for example. I mean, there's complete, as long as it's simple, personal use. It doesn't matter what it is, and that's not successful. I mean, you can read that's not working out very well.
Yeah, they're having a lot of issues there.
So I think again, it's just to get back to some, if there's such a thing as common sense, to get back to at least some middle ground approach to, there are people. There was this big, this line of thought that there were all these people doing life sentences on just like simple possession of marijuana.
Yeah, that's something that's been talked about a lot too since since it's been made legal in certain states and certain areas. That a lot of times if they're getting arrested on I agree in the fact that if you just had a little bit and you're just using it personal use and you weren't distributing or trying to shake up society, that maybe the penalty shouldn't be that harsh. But there's a lot of people not realize that these people are moving hundreds of pounds of this stuff and distributing it, and
well, that's the part that's not realistic. Is that when you if you would ask somebody that talks that to give you examples of that they're not going to give you examples of you don't have a guy with a joint that got pulled over in a joint.
He's not going to jail for
prison.
No, he's not even going to jail for 5 years, man. He's not.
I would tell you that probably in the last 5 years, at least, law enforcement, before the law changed in the way that it did, generally, a simple possession was a ticket, or a summons to court anyway.
Misdemeanor.
Yeah, you didn't book people on that.
No.
And so that's not something that the law, yes, it's changed a little bit, but the law, that change kind of happened before the law.
Yeah, and it's a federally legal thing. Like, it's just like if you commit tax fraud, if you get arrested on that, there's like, oh shit, yeah, they messed up. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's illegal federally. Right. But there's this other thing that's illegal federally in certain levels. And if you just like taxes or evasion or anything like that, if you exceed those whatever those limitations are, then you're held accountable for them. And it's just the law. It doesn't matter if you think it's fair or not. I mean, that's the law, and that's what we live in, But I think it all boils down to this. If there's accountability delivered and served up on both sides of the fence, whether it be, just the person, either side, whether it be the criminal or the other person, if you're serving up accountability, then there's going to be lives saved, no matter what, on both sides.
Right.
Like that other scenario you said, like there was not accountability served up for a certain amount of time. So unfortunately, that individual is no longer with us because of those issues, right? And yes, it could be the other way around. If accountability is not served up to that individual, it could be someone who's not with us because of same thing on the other side,
right?
No,
absolutely.
But man, I think we're gonna have to do another one of these because there's so much more we could talk about. Man, is there anything you want to leave anybody with, or anything last words you have, or anything?
One, I just tell you thank you for having me in today, and certainly I'd be glad to come back anytime you'd want. I think it's important to be able to be candid, and obviously I try to mind what I say and say it in a way that's respectful to people, but I also have a set of principles, and it's important that we can be seen as, even in leaders of law enforcement, as being somebody that thinks about things much larger than maybe people can anticipate, as well as just being open to talking about it. And you go try to have this debate like we're not even a debate, but a conversation like we're having.
It's not going to happen anywhere
in a public forum, and somebody's going to yell at you and all that kind of stuff. And so just being able to talk candidly and be in a space that's just two guys talking, I guess.
Exactly.
I appreciate that, and have enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, that's a wrap, man. I appreciate it.